I'd like to welcome to the third conference of Novarus. Unknown Feature of Terror is our actually second remarkable event in Norway. I would like to give a briefly information about Novarus. I come with the idea in 2012. In my political background, I have been invited to Council of Europe and Security Council in Warsaw as a speaker a couple of times, and after for a while I understand that the case of the terror become more and more important for the not only the political world but also daily life. So. I met with my colleague Michael Klitsch, I don't know where he is, but he must be around here, and started this platform. Novarus actually founded in 2012, and in order to provide critical insight about national and international security matters. Also, analytical views of Novarus partners aim to uncover outstanding perspectives in the political arena. Our organization so far delivered academic publications in energy wars, Syria conflict, media, and terror topics. And similar discussions of the group were also published by the international and local newspapers, such as were also published by international and local newspapers, as I mentioned, Financial Times, Aftenposten, Ütrop, some of the Turkish newspapers also. We cover some articles. I hope maybe in the future in the Vega. I have three guests today. Before we started, I would like to give a brief information. Mr. Bondevik will be here, unfortunately, only 1 hour. So, according to the program, if you can see the program, first we will have the speeches, Mr. Bondevik, Ercan Çitlioğlu, and Brianar. But because of the time schedule, after his speech, we can take the questions directly to the Mr. Bondevik, because he will be here till around 6 o'clock. So, and after we will continue our conference with Mr. Ercan Çitlioğlu and Brianar. When we start,
three crucial questions in the world of today. All of us here should see upon ourselves as a coalition working relentlessly to track down terrorists. We know that in the world we try to do so by military and police efforts, as well by financial and judicial means. These efforts must continue vigorously, but we must do more. Since we have our friend from Turkey here today, Mr. Çitlioğlu from Turkey, and we have also people in the audience from Turkey and the ambassador, Your Excellency. We know all that Turkey is heavily affected by terror. There are several rather recent examples from that. And therefore I have full understanding of the great consensus in all parts of the Turkish society about fighting against this terror. And we have empathy with all victims of horrible terror in Turkey and elsewhere. But also in the rest of Europe, closer to Norway, we have seen terrorist attacks over the last years. For instance, in May 2014, a man killed 3 persons inside the Jewish Museum in Brussels. In May...
Well, thank you for your question. Well, when we have a look at the terrorist, where the terrorist organizations flail and where the terrorist attacks occurred, it is mostly the geographical area where the energy resources or the energy lines are inside of them. So, especially when we have a look at the Middle East, as you all know, nearly 67 or 68% of the energy resources in the world are located in the Middle East. And the Middle Eastern countries used to spend just 20% of the energy resources they have. And on the other hand, the Western countries, they have 30% of the energy resources in the world reserves, and they are spending nearly 60 or 65% of the energy resources. So there is an imbalance between the countries. They need the energy, and also the countries, they already have the energy resources. And that's why when we have a look at the macro view, or the bird's eye view, in depth, not all of them, but it is easy to say one of the most important reasons of the terrorist organization flare up in the Middle East and also in the Latin American countries, it's related with the energy resources, and I am afraid it will go on in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any question from the audience?
Actually, I will start with a self-question. As we know that Switzerland is the country that's, I think, recognized the most neutral country in the world when it comes to the international relations. And my personal view is that Norway loves to be called a neutral country, although it's also like a NATO-founder country, etc. And what makes Switzerland really neutral? More accepted neutrality that they have, because it's not only the wish of the recent benefits of a state, it's the geography that's defining the status of Switzerland, because Switzerland is in the middle of Europe. Secondly, it's a high ground, itself is a fort, so it's a place that's always been hard to invade, and therefore also, like, even though you invade in Switzerland, you don't really get a good income, etc. So that made Switzerland really the neutral country. And Norway is, in every opportunity, it loves to call itself a neutral country. And so far, of course, it went okay, because there was the world was not much more polarized since the Cold War, we can say, and recently now we are in this process of more polarization in the world, and especially now when the Trump takes the power, all of the, as Mr. Shirley said, the plans were like set to Clinton's success, Hillary Clinton's takeover of the presidency, and now the Norwegian government of today and probably the future one in September, the new one, will be in a very hard balance problem. Like they will have like really serious conflicts. The reason is their society is highly intellectual, socialist understanding, but the American society that's like now taking over the power, it's like more like a Trump TV show, kind of, that's like taking over. So I think it will be very difficult to be the governor of Norway, especially from now on. So how will Norwegian neutrality survive through this? I would like to ask this question to Mr. Bunyar Shirley. Thank you.
I doesn't agree that Norway is neutral. I mean, Norway have taken a stance on a lot of questions. I mean, we have been a part of the war in Libya. We have been a part of the war in Afghanistan. We are a part of different kind of trade agreements, for example, while Switzerland is a completely different story. They are not part of anything, almost. So I cannot the history of Switzerland, so I don't think I will go into that. But I think that Norway wants to of course continue the NATO membership, and that is the most important thing for Norway when it comes to the Trump administration. And I don't think anyone fear that there will be an end of NATO, but as I said, there might be a fear that the US want to change NATO towards something else. I mean, NATO is what it is now, but you have these signals that NATO might change in the direction of more trying to go after terrorist groups, for example. You have had have given these kind of signals, and then it's way too early to conclude anything. This is just signals, and what we have seen is that those changes. Of course, what can be interesting is if the relationship between the US and Russia change, then we have a new situation, because there also we see that Norway is not neutral. Norway have implemented the sanctions against Russia together with a lot of other countries. So we have taken a very clear stand there. So if the US want to change that too, that will implement heavily on Norway, which at least is a neighboring country to Russia. So of course there are some issues here that will be important for Norway, but the thing is that it is uncertain what is going to happen, and I think we just have to wait and see.
Thank you for your answer. I have a regarding question and a following question to Mr. Breiner. According to your statement, then we come back to the point that how we will have a standard to define terror and terrorist groups according to NATO. Will it be the right choice, or for the Western world or the total world? Because according to Mr. Bonnevik, he said that in his statement that we have to unite it and fight against terrorism in all parts, from Asia to Europe, Europe to United States, and so on, as a world together. Because it's a common problem, it's a global problem, it's not a local problem anymore, and we have to have a definition of the terrorism and the terrorist groups in the world per today. But how actually we can standardize this? How we will call, or who we will call, the terrorist groups? As I mentioned in my earlier speech, for instance, for actually groups like Hamas and so on, for in their region, they're fighting against imperialism, and they are freedom fighters and so on. And in the Western worlds, we accept them as a terrorist. Also, other groups which I mentioned earlier. So, how we will define the terrorist groups? Actually, this is my this is a question for both for you and for Mr. Schittler.
I can start. The definition have been hijacked the last years. I mean, Bashar al-Assad is calling everyone which is fighting against him for terrorists. While the Western world is defining some of those who are on the ground in Syria for terrorists. And we see also the same a lot of other places, like in Russia, in the Caucasus, for example, where there is also this terrorist definition which the leader are claiming that it only is terrorists which are fighting against them, which of course is not the whole picture. So I think this is about a political aim. It is about going after civilians. I mean, if you are going after civilians and you have a political aim, then you are a terrorist.
Okay. Mr. Chitolo, could you challenge the question?
Well, I think we have to give a proper answer for one question. Who are the terrorists and who are the insurgents? So what are the differences between the insurgency and the terrorism? If we cannot give a proper and net and a clear answer to this question, we cannot make any defense against terrorism. For example, in Iraq, the Iraqis, they are defending their country to an invasion force called by the invaders as terrorists, but they call themselves as insurgents. In Syria, well, someone called that Syria is a conflict is going on. Some other sources, according to us, some other sources, it is a civil war. But if you ask to me, my humble idea is a proxy war is going on in Syria. It is war of the outsiders, actors, using the Syrian geography as to reach their targets and to their aims. So the Syrians, but see, I really cannot understand, we are naming and calling the Syrian armed forces as the regime forces. It is not. They are Syrian armed forces. Because there is a legitimate government in Syria, and the Syrian armed forces belong to this legitimate government. So why we are calling the opposition groups as freedom fighters? So this is the dilemma. So we have to be sincere while we are defining the terrorists and while we are defining the terrorism. As far as some superpowers and powers used to terrorism as a tool or as an instrument in order to reach their aims and target, well, after 100 years, maybe some others will have your seats and someone else sitting in here, and they will talk about terrorism. So if we accept this reality, then maybe there could be something against terrorism. But with this mind and with this perception, I am afraid the terrorism will take us a prisoner. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Also, I have another question according to Mr. Björnar's speech. He has mentioned that we have to have some standards also according to freedom of speech, and you mentioned legal limitation standards according to the law, I guess. But I mean, we already have that for today. We are, you know, and it doesn't really, does it really help? We still have this challenge still when it comes to the freedom of speech. What's legal, what's not legal. It has been forced by the governments and governmental powers, politicians, popularized from them. So do you think the legal limitation will be the solution?